What is that over there? A flying saucer? An attempt to undermine the moral fiber of modern youths? Yes, but it is also destroy all humans.
Destroy all humans. Now, that's not a title I think we would be hearing from again after all these years, but here we are. In this video brought to you by Digital Foundry and Destroy All Humans, I will take a quick look back in time to talk about the enduring legacy of this game and how it fits into gaming history. And what exactly does the remake do here to capture that 2005 feeling and update it for the present? So let's hop on our spaceship and travel back 15 years or so to see what made this game what it is. As I see it, Destroy All Humans is as fascinating as the time it came out in. It's really emblematic of its era. On the one hand, you have the content matter of the game. Destroy All Humans from 2005 is very much so a game rooted in the cultural entertainment of the post-millennium era. It has this kind of zany and misanthropic edge to it that you see from Jonan Vasquez comics, or going so far back to Ren and Stimpy. You play as an alien who has no concept of human morality, and your objectives often mean just zapping, abducting, or terrorizing the local and unwitting populace. It aims to make you laugh with its cartoonish violence, not really make you think critically about ludonarrative dissonance. It is also rooted in the post-millennium trend of remixes and covers of pop culture tropes. So you, the player, are the fish-out-of-water alien arriving in 1950s America, a land dominated by McCarthyism, post-war boom, and the meteoric rise of television entertainment. So the game is using every opportunity it can to make jokes at the expense of the 1950s in America.
Harold, come on back! You gotta see this! They got a talking horse on the TV! I ain't never seen nothing like.
But it is also paying direct homage to the films and entertainment of that time. So it's basically presented like a 1950s science fiction B-film, and has all the musical and visual cues to evoke that era. It has a bit of that Austin Powers-like thing going on, but with darker humor. Along with that post-millennium edge, as I'll call it, it also really could only come out during this history of video games. It is what I like to call a small game idea. Condensed mission zones, condensed mini-game-like gameplay at times, and assets and technical aspects designed around the original Xbox and PlayStation 2. It's very different than the cinematic-driven, ultra-polished, ultra-detailed, and self-serious games that we saw starting primarily in the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation, which last until today. This game is not AAA and it's not trying to be, and that is not an insult here. Rather, that is the game's strength, which makes it stand out. You see, the game was developed by Pandemic Studios and published by THQ. While THQ would eventually be revived after its demise, Pandemic was sadly not. But that studio's legacy still lives on to this day, as Pandemic was really a master at this AA class of game during the PS2 generation. The studio produced extremely popular and successful games like Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2, as well as more niche titles like the critically acclaimed Full Spectrum Warrior. Pandemic also did this while being highly prolific in production, with them releasing 11 games between the launch of the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, which is really an absurd amount of games when you think about it. If you consider the time period and technology though, it does make a bit of sense. Game models, textures, and gameplay loops could only take up so much processing time or memory back in this era. This is when the PlayStation 2 was the base lowest end machine, and it had 32 megabytes of system RAM and 4 megabytes of EDRAM. So game assets had to be smaller, less diverse, and less detailed. Game production by its very nature at this time was smaller. You did need less money to make a game back then. Any larger group of game developers could actually be working on multiple projects at once, and with a greater amount of games in total, it meant that you could also embrace more out there styles, as the financial risk per project was lower back during this time. You could have smaller games like Destroy All Humans that just look to be entertaining fun, instead of chasing some overly ambitious AAA cinematic dream. This smaller AA experience of games like that found in Destroy All Humans started to disappear the further we got into that Xbox 360 and PS3 generation. As the generation went on, many game studios producing games of this size largely disappeared. In 2020 though, all that is old is now new again, and things have changed. The consolidation of publishers that produce large, high-risk AAA game productions is still around, of course, but smaller production is once again in vogue, like it was in the post-millennium period. THQ Nordic, which is publishing this game, is a part of that. So it is now the time where old niche AA titles from yesteryear, like Desperados, can be brought back from the dead, given a new lick of paint, polish, and gameplay finesse, and then released to a positive reception. A big part of this change as I see it is due to the rise of flexible and powerful middleware engines like Unity and Unreal Engine. These engines keep the production cost and development time down for smaller endeavors. So Desperados 3 is on Unity, and Destroy All Humans in its remade form here is on Unreal Engine 4. These engines bring down costs and risk perhaps, but they also allow games to scale up quickly in graphical quality and polish. And in this case, there are large differences between Destroy All Humans Remake and the original game due to the engine tech. The original technology powering that first game in 2005 though is interesting in its own right. Destroy All Humans was released on PlayStation 2 and the original Microsoft Xbox. And here for this video, I am primarily showing off that original Xbox version brought to you by Xbox One X backwards compatibility mode, where the game is running in a widescreen presentation, taking up from that original 480p resolution to 1920p on Xbox One X, and given 16 times anisotropic filtering. This game never got a PC port back in the day, so this is really the best way you can play this original 2005 game today. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, the technological constraints of that time had an easing effect on game asset production, but this game also has the curious characteristic of being a late generation game. It came out on Xbox and PlayStation 2 in June of 2005, which is just a few months before the Xbox 360 had released. So it has a number of the late generation hallmarks of that time. Character models and assets up close have rather decent high poly counts and even texture resolution, though it is not on the upper end of that scale though if you look at it in comparison to something like Silent Hill 2. But it's nothing to complain about. What I find interesting technologically is the game's lighting and shadows. On Xbox, all of the smaller and perhaps dynamic models in the game project what look to be stencil shadows onto the terrain and other objects. These type of shadows were all the rage back in this time period after getting so famous with games like Doom 3, yet in this game they're a bit more limited, and I imagine that's due to targeting 30 FPS here on the original Xbox hardware. So these stencil shadows cast from models do not self-shadow the objects they are cast from, nor do they cast onto other objects all the time necessarily, like character models that move under the influence. Interestingly, the game does not use these stencil shadows for all of the game's shadows. Hard stencil shadows from trees or bushes, for example, would probably look unnatural and be too expensive anyway. So this game uses projected shadow map-like textures for such objects. So it's a pretty okay looking game for the generation. It even has some Xbox 360-like tech in it with its usage of bloom, which covers the entire image. The limitations on display here are from the hardware, and most obviously found in the draw distance of the game, which is rather aggressive and low. So objects pop into existence rather close in front of the camera, while character models, for example, swap to lower levels of detail and texture very close. At the ultra high res on Xbox One X, the level of detailed behavior in the game can make the game look a bit shaky and under-detailed. The remake, of course, is a whole different beast entirely here, as it's launching on state-of-the-art technology with UE4 powering it. And it scales up now to having a PC version, which is what I'm using as a point of comparison here. When putting it back to back with the original game, you can see some key differences. The first would be how the game handles pre-rendered cinematics. In the original game, they were offline rendered videos using completely different models and effects, so some sort of offline software. They have a different art style as well than the rest of the game, and they stick out. In the new version, these videos are still pre-rendered, but done so within Unreal Engine 4. And it's using the models and assets from the game. This makes the art style throughout more consistent. And if you look at the character models here, you can see that the game has a slightly different art direction. The original game has these rather realistic proportions and focuses on realistic texturing on characters and the environment to drive its look. The remake in comparison leans heavily into the pop comic look, where characters have exaggerated facial features and body types that match the exaggerated world they're found in. The world and the characters now look kind of cartoony. While the art style has changed, much of the audio in the game is very much so the same. Specifically, the voice audio assets for characters are the same as those in the original, so you get all those wonderfully over-the-top recordings that set the game's atmosphere, like the excellent Richard Stephen Horvitz playing Pox, who is hamming it up here to some intense levels.
Our destination, the planet Earth.
Or all the other character voices of the humans showing off various stereotypes. My particular favorite has to be the John F. Kennedy, Mayor Quimby-like politician found in the game's opening.
So the next time you see a strange light moving and changing direction at incredible speed in the night sky, you just think to yourself, no commie's gonna distract me from my patriotic duty with a couple of bottle rockets. No, sir.
Coming back to visuals though, art style is just one part of the visible change in the remake, and really secondary to the massive changes in fidelity and detail. This is immediately evident when you start the first mission of the game. Looking at these two versions of the game side by side, the original and the remake, you can see the massive difference of 15 years of engine technology and hardware. With this, the detail in the environment is pushed out to fill the terrain into the distance, and shadow maps are being cast from every object. On top of this massive increase in density on screen, a lot of the high-end Unreal Engine 4 features are found here and used to spruce up these comic-styled visuals, like the usage of screen space contact shadows, which give nice contact shadows in the environment and in cutscenes on character faces, like you can see here on Crypto 137. You have other high-end effects like screen space reflections found across the game's physically based materials, like the metal undersides of the ship or on water surfaces. You also have ground textures for sand and mud and other terrain being filled out with tessellation height maps. So as you get closer to the ground, you can see a lot of extra detail filled out with real 3D geometry. There's even a deforming 3D mesh used for the ocean waterfront here, and what looks to be a subsurface scattering effect. These modernizations carry as well over to the game's effects work. A big part of the game is just hopping into your flying saucer and laying waste to the game's buildings. In the original game, a time-tested method was used there that is still in use today. The 2005 game has an original pristine model that sinks into the ground upon destruction and is swapped in with a destroyed model that emerges in its place. This transition between the models is covered up in the slightest way with some particle work. In the remake, that same scenario has the building now blowing out with individual pieces flying in every direction, showcasing very complex physics actually. The remake looks to be using geometry cache animations, which is a powerful feature found in Unreal Engine 4 and used in Premiere titles like Gears of War. This allows for realistic physics animations at high detail while not being heavy on the GPU or CPU. When totaling up all of the engine and technology differences next to the older game, it can be quite amusing to go back and forth. 15 years have really made a profound difference, and high-end rendering can really benefit cartoony art styles like those found in the remake. So visuals showcase a colossal change here, but gameplay has a more subtle modernization. The overarching way Destroy All Humans is played is indeed more or less the same, as you have access to all those same powers and weaponry, and goals in a mission even, but the input scheme is fitted for modern controllers and keyboard sensibilities, and the level design is a bit wider, polished, and less condensed than it was in the original game. There are also some modernizations to how you progress through the game itself. For example, in the first level in the original game from 2005, after you finish the main objective there, you cannot leave the level until you've collected a certain amount of DNA. Only then, after you've done this, can you return to the mothership to upgrade your abilities and start the next mission. So at this point, you either go through the level you already beat, harvesting DNA from respawning characters, or you search for enough hidden collectibles, or you complete minigame challenges scattered across that level to get more DNA. This means doing minigames where you destroy enemies for a certain amount of period of time, or do something like minigame racing where you follow waypoints and keep under a time limit. I would not exactly call that very modern game design. It has more in common with the collectible gating that you could see in early 3D games from the mid to late 90s. The remake takes a different approach where levels end when you finish the main quest objective, but you can complete them in style, as I'll call it, by completing the quest in a silly way or by putting your own limitations or challenges on your playstyle. In the first level, you can get extra DNA by completing the level by taking out the farmer's wife with the chicken. Sure, there are still collectibles here, but they're less forced, and the meta elements of the game are more like optional challenges, or hard mode runs of the level after you already beat it. So it's a more modern, almost Hitman-like style or S-rank-like style to expand the game's content. When taking a broader look at this remake of Destroy All Humans, it's essentially a return to a different and honestly simpler time of game development and even gaming itself. The goofy AA side project that disappeared for so long is back due to technology like UE4 and a market and publisher willing to embrace these kind of games. And as a person who loves these older games that focus on gameplay or have a very clear style and focus, I'm all for this AA revival. Not every game needs to be a massive sprawling open world, nor do they need to be a self-serious and cinematic linear adventure. And due to modern game engines like Unreal or Unity, offbeat AA experiences do not necessarily need to compromise in their visuals, so a new AA renaissance sounds fine by me. But that is enough from me for now. If you did enjoy this look into the past as well as the present brought to you by Destroy All Humans and Digital Foundry, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you are already a subscriber, then consider hitting that little bell in the corner to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to see this video in the highest quality possible, support us on Patreon to get years worth of our content available in high quality for download. If you want to talk to me about Destroy All Humans or the year 2005, write a comment below or follow me and Digital Foundry on Twitter. And as always, this is Alex, bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.
Martians! They want to destroy our way of life!